Today we're talking with Tim McRae from Meat and Livestock Australia. Well, Tim, firstly looking at the national herd, and what are you seeing when it comes to numbers in the national herd and the rebuild?
Really the last 30 months now of wet conditions has seen a lot of producers deciding to hold on to their females, either cows or heifers, to get more calves on the ground over time. So the Australian herd's approaching around 30 million head, and historically that's a big herd. And the thing to point out there is most of the growth is across Northern Australia. It's Queensland and Northern Territory, where really the competition for land from other enterprises, be it sheep or cropping in the south, isn't there for the north. So we continue to see the beef herd move north over time.
What about the mix in the herd between Bos Indicus and Bos Taurus?
Yeah, actually it's seeing a lot more Bos Taurus influence come into Northern Australia as the meat quality becomes a bigger focus. So we're actually hearing reports of gradually over time more and more of the Angus genetics, if you like, or the Hereford genetics moving into Northern Australia that maybe 10 or 15 years ago would have been questioned. And really that's behind the desire for better carcasses across those Bos Indicus breeds that also have their advantages in the northern parts. Now,
you mentioned moving towards 30 million head. What about from a feedlotting point of view? Are we seeing an increase in the number of animals on feed?
No, we're not as a total number, no. And it's been pretty tough for the lot feeds in the last 2 years, mainly due to Japan, the market that takes most of the grain-fed beef. And they normally had an animal that was on feed for sort of 150 days and longer. The returns haven't been there, so we've seen that side of the market take a big hit. But what we have seen is a lot or more cattle going through feedlots for a shorter period of time. So that's typically product for your Australian market, and that's driven by requirements from particularly Woolworths and Coles, and that's cattle on feed for probably 60 or 70 days to really add a consistency to the carcass for when they eventually use it in their own shelves.
Now, you discussed a fair bit about our foreign markets and where we're going. Firstly, looking at new markets that are emerging before we look at our traditional markets, and what are you finding when it comes to the development of some new markets to take that bigger herd, as you said, getting towards a record level?
Yeah, look, we typically look at our big three markets, which is Japan, Korea and the US, and they still are very influential in our industry, but we now send about 30% of our exports to other markets, and that's anywhere from Indonesia to Taiwan to the Philippines, the Middle East. We even send beef to Chile and Brazil. So we are seeing growing demand in those markets. And interesting, it's at different price points through their countries, and for different requirements of cut. So typically we send a product called Shinshank to Taiwan. That's just what they really desire. And we send short ribs to Korea. So it's really about growing these markets and understanding what the type of product it is that they desire. And the Australian industry and exporters have done a great job in that in the last 10 years to really diversify or put more eggs in the basket to help cushion the blow when we do see a slowdown from Japan that we're seeing at the moment.
Now you mentioned Chile. What product do they want?
Oh look, they take a range of product, but typically very high quality rumps. They just really demand that product. It's how they cook it in their own market. I haven't been over there yet to check it out. But look, they're a big importing market. They take a lot of product from Brazil, Argentina and Australia. But they really search out some particular cuts from Australia that's just what their market desires, and they can't get that from other South American countries.
Now, as you stated, Japan has traditionally been our big market. They have been suffering economically for a reasonable period of time now. What are you noting with that market and the demand from Japan for Australian beef products?
The big shift there is they want lower priced product. They 10 years ago, even when we had the market order ourselves when the US was locked out, we were selling them a really wide range and particularly high quality grain-fed beef, chilled, which sells at a higher price point. What we're seeing now is they now take more frozen beef than they do chilled beef for the first time in a long time, and that's really an indication that their end users or their restaurants just want a bit more flexibility with their stocks, which they can sit on frozen beef for a bit longer, but also they're driving the demand for manufacturing beef or lower quality beef that consumers in Japan just aren't willing to pay high prices for anymore.
Now looking at South Korea and what is happening in that market.
South Korea has been a star for us over the last few years, but particularly in the last 12 months has slowed significantly. It's a combination of competition from the US as they get better access there for their product, but also there's a lot of pork in their market. They've had some big shipments, government decisions to put more pork in there. but also their own cattle herd is in a liquidation phase, so they're killing more as well. So we're sort of faced with a multitude in that Korean market of more pork, more Korean beef, more US beef. And whilst Australian beef fights pretty well in there, it's a tough market at the moment.
Now, you mentioned the US, but they've had quite severe drought conditions, which must be impacting on their herd and their ability to export. So what are you noticing there, both from a demand from Australia, but also a production point of view?
Yeah, look, demand for Australian product has increased 50% this year. We'll send about 250,000 tonnes of beef to that market. Always a very good market for Australian beef, and it's manufacturing beef. Again, it's for food service, hamburger patties, those kind of items. But their drought there's the big thing, and their US beef industry is built on corn. So corn is the major input. About 90% of all the beef they produce is finished on corn. So we're seeing corn prices at record highs there, so that's putting a lot of pressure on their viability of their industry. But also puts a lot of pressure on whether they can pass that through to consumers. It puts pressure on US beef prices into Japan and Korea, which is a good thing for Australia. So look, it's a situation to follow very closely, but yeah, look, corn underpins a lot of not just beef but pork and chicken in the US. And it's putting a lot of pressure on their prices, which Australia's in a position to capitalise on.
Now, the other thing you mentioned was the Australian dollar and where the currency sits and movements in that currency. What impact do you believe the dollar is going to have on potential returns that Australian producers are going to get over the next 1 to 2 years?
Yeah, we still export volume-wise, nearly record amounts, but value-wise it's fallen significantly, and it's just that impact of the dollar that it just erodes how much you can ask for a consumer in another country for that same product. And really it's about how competitive our dollar is for beef against Brazil and the US. In the US at the moment, our dollar's high, theirs is low. It's the flip side of the coin, so we're hoping it comes down. We're hoping it comes down slowly over time and sustained at a lower level. Because if there's one thing worse than the currency markets than a high dollar, it's a volatile dollar. Because that gets all the traders just waiting and watching. And we saw through the GFC in 2008-09 that when the dollar was volatile, no one wanted to buy product because they didn't want to be caught at a high point in the market if it was going to fall further. So we watch it very closely. We watch it with great anticipation of just what the mineral markets are doing, to the impact that has on the dollar. But hopefully over time it just edges lower.
Tim McRae, thanks for talking to Agribusiness today.
That's right. Thank you.